Okay, so this is podcast number 3. This is focusing on the body of your essay, the main substantive element. This is the third of 5 podcasts. The first looked at a few general tips and issues and tried to explain what makes a really good master's essay. And I set those out as analytical depth, critical understanding, breadth of reading, a good structure, and clear, concise English. Now, I've just, in Webcast 2, looked at how to set up an introduction. And the role of this webcast is to focus on the main body of your essay. Now, at the end of the last podcast, I explained this notion of an hourglass, where you kind of start off wide with your introduction, and then you cut down into the main body, and then you get narrower as you focus on your core comparative element, and then at the end you maybe locate it within a number of broader issues and themes. Now, in terms of the main body, most essays will go from the introduction to a section which is a broad overview of the area that they're working on. So if you're doing a piece of work on earthquake risk regulation regimes, you might go from your introduction to the section which provides a broad overview of this topic. Now, this is where the issue of balance becomes absolutely key. You might sometimes read in somebody's notes on the essay, the feedback, that the essay is seen to be very front heavy or very back heavy or very light in the middle. Essentially, the introduction should provide a short and fairly brief account of what the essay is all about. If the essay is 3,000 words or 2.5, the introduction should be really probably only 450 words. It would then flow into a second section, which was a broader synthesis of the existing material, which is essentially providing a bridge between the introduction and your substantive focus in your essay. And the overview might be 1,000 words or 800. And then each of your case studies, if you have 2 case studies, you might have those at around 800 words each. And then your conclusion might be around 500 words. But what you don't want is a really long introduction, a sort of history of the world on your topic, followed by very, very short case studies and a very short 1-paragraph conclusion. You want a short, tight, focused introduction, and then you want the main substantive text of your essay to be focused on the empirical hook that you've said you're going to focus on. So it's also really good when you're sketching out your plan of your essay to just put down how many words you want each section to be. It might be 300-400 for your introduction, 600-700 for your main sort of theoretical part, 800 each for your 2 case studies, or maybe 400 each if you're having 3 case studies, or you might be having 20 case studies using quantitative data. But then the conclusion, make sure you have time in terms of text space to do justice to your conclusion. Think about the flow and the balance. Not top heavy, not bottom heavy, back heavy, end heavy, but balanced throughout, with really the main substance being in the middle. Okay? So, what you might do, let's just go with this idea of earthquake preparation, UK, United States and Pakistan. What I might do if I was approaching this essay, if I were you, I would have a piece of work, a section of my essay after the introduction that looked at risk regulation regimes and natural disasters. And that would very briefly survey the existing material as far as I can synthesize it on that topic. How has the way governments try to approach contingency planning for natural disasters changed? How does this relate to Beck's work on the risk society or Freire's work on the politics of fear? Who are the main scholars on this topic and what are they saying? I would expect this section to be really packed out with references and really trying to provide a strong flavour of what the existing literature base, knowledge base, research base is telling us about this topic. In a way, it's like painting on a broader canvas, but in a minute you're going to fill in one small part of that canvas, down there, just about there, by looking at your 2 case studies in more detail. So in a way, this is about the balance between breadth and depth. You're carving up the material to narrow down. So for example, you might find, and I don't know if this exists, I'm making this up, you might find a really good analytical framework for examining risk regulation regimes. Now, I know Lodge and Hood have a framework. You might say, there's all this work out there, lots of references, lots of topics, lots of areas, but you might say, in order to achieve a balance between breadth and depth, this essay is going to utilise Hood and Lodge's framework on risk regulatory regimes, but take it into a new terrain by seeing if it adds value to our understanding of contingency planning in relation to earthquakes. So what you're doing very clearly is saying, very honestly, there's this established framework, I'm going to pick it up, I'm going to take it to some new terrain. It's never been applied in relation to earthquakes. Dangerous dogs, paedophiles, yep, it's been applied there. Let's have a look. Does it work in relation to natural disasters? So in a way then, you would set up and discuss Hood's framework or whatever framework you've used. And then, when you've done that part, you would say, okay, the core question this essay is seeking to examine or to answer is, what is the difference in terms of contingency planning for earthquakes between the United States and Pakistan? In order to answer this question, this section of the essay has explored the broader literature on risk regulation regimes. It has highlighted one particular framework as potentially offering a tool through which to answer this question. The aim of the next section is to start using this framework in relation to our first empirical case study, that being the United States. Now that is an example of what I call signposting. It's really a good thing to do without going too far, to end each section by just very briefly relating to it back to your core question. And as an author, as a writer, you need to think about this yourself. If you're not actually sure what you're writing has anything to do with your core question, then you need to probably chop it out. It might be a really good piece of writing. You might find the topic really interesting, but if it's not adding anything to the core question, it's likely to dilute rather than strengthen your work. So, the issue of signposting is quite clearly just very gently, for your sake and for the reader, highlighting how each individual section relates and helps you tease apart your core question or hook. It also provides a link to the next section. So in this essay, I would then go on to look at United States, Pakistan, and I might have 2 sections, fairly brief, 300-400 words, that are purely descriptive. They just describe what the government, what the political system does, the amount of resources it puts in, the systems it has in place, its use of technology, what the broader literature and primary documents can tell us about the risk regulatory regimes in these 2 countries. 1 section on the United States, 1 on Pakistan. Then you might have a penultimate section, a next section, which is analysis. You move from description to analysis. You look at comparing between and within your 2 case studies. So essentially what that section is trying to do is to say, okay, section 3 or section 2, depending if your introduction is a section or just an introduction. So let's say section 1, we just had introduction. Then we had section 1, which was our broader review of risk regulation. Then we had section 2, which was on the United States. Then we had section 3, which was Pakistan. Then we might have section 4 called analysis. What this does is moves from description to analysis by using the framework that you set out in section 1 and applying it to the 2 case studies you looked in sections 2 and 3. So in that way, instead of having 2 case studies that are really interesting but don't really seem to be compared and contrasted, by having an analysis section, you very clearly set out what patterns, what continuities, what changes you can see, and how it might be possible to explain them. And if you've got a framework that you've developed earlier that you can sort of put on top of both of your case studies to allow for that comparison, that is all the better for providing a degree of tightness or clarity. So, it clearly depends on what is your key hook or question. It is so important to have a clear question and a clear structure, and that you can very clearly say, I've included that section because it helps explain my core question in this way. Boom, 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 boom. If you've got that hook and that structure and a nice balance in terms of word length and lots of references, that's starting to sound like a really good essay. Which leads to the end of this webcast, and we need to move on to webcast 4, which is focused on wrapping it all up. What does a good conclusion look like? That's webcast 4.